Holy jumping, Pierre Poilievre calls it for what it is. You know the story in the interview that has surfaced over the past week of Mark Carney at an event talking about how he influences politicians with his political power to then drive money and funds into the companies that he's either working with or working for and getting rich in the process. Remember that interview? Getting to the top. Well, a reporter brought that up in the press conference with Pierre Poilievre today, and Pierre Poilievre took the time to address it. It was very interesting. And then we talk as well as some story that took place yesterday is Blanchet calling Carney out for what he is, and curious of how that's actually going to impact Quebec voters as we move forward. And then as well, of course, Liberals getting a little arrogant over the polls lately. They're getting a little overconfident, and they get checked on CBC. Very fascinating. We're going to get into all of it, but first, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, helps us to get our voice and amplify it to the world. You know, we're going against the billion-dollar machine, and you helping us and cooperating with us is what makes this thing go on. So if you could please like and share it if you find it valuable, please do so. It means the world. So let's head on over to out west, where Pierre Poilievre did a press conference talking about advocating for workers' rights, advocating for a stronger dollar for workers, advocating for more power to workers so that they can feed their families, buy a home, and have a better future. And he was a pretty good press conference. He hits on a couple different issues, but it was more so the questions that came afterwards that really were very newsworthy. And typically, that's what it is. Reporters come, ask questions, and spark a thought. They spark a response from the politician. And Pierre Poilievre had some golden moments today that were just more so just eye-opening. We're going to share two of them. And the first one is, as I said to start off, the Mark Carney interview gets brought up to Pierre Poilievre and what his reaction is to it. And well, it was fascinating.
Well, it's crony capitalism. It works against these people behind me. Let's just unpack what Mr. Carney did in this particular case. He used his political power to convince the British government to require more expensive jet fuel for air travel. And then his company invested $1 billion in the company that was selling that jet fuel. So if, God forbid, a family like the people behind me here want to take their kids on a vacation somewhere, they have to pay higher airplane ticket prices to fund this more expensive jet fuel so that Mark Carney's $1 billion investment can pay off. Mr. Carney is not a businessman. He is a political grifter who has used his political influence to turn decisions that profit his company at the expense of workers and seniors. And that is exactly how he would govern the country. While he was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, he went on the record saying that he thought there should be more inflation. He thought it would be good if there was more inflation. Well, it turns out Brookfield, his company, profits from inflation. They get to charge higher rents on their tenants, according to their CEO. So he has used his political influence to rip off workers and seniors, and now, with all the political power of a prime minister, he continues to be invested in the same company, Brookfield, the same company that benefits by raising inflation, by raising energy prices, and by ripping off workers and seniors. Today's announcement is another example of that. How would Mark Carney ever be trusted to make our tax system fair when he's invested in a company that has billions of dollars of cash stashed away in an overseas tax haven?
There you go. He calls it for what it was. A man who uses his political connections or political positions to manipulate and change purchasing behaviors and getting rich off of regular people. And that's exactly what we are currently seeing. We saw him manipulate his connections as he was the chair of Brookfield. Now, just imagine now, what will happen if that man is now in the decision-maker spot? He can have complete and utter impact over policy decisions that will directly benefit the companies that he's invested in, still has shares in, or has worked for in the past. Imagine how that's actually going to work out for the regular Canadian. How can that be trusted? Or do we need to be reminded about how Brookfield tried to lobby the government to try and get as much of Canadian pension funds under their advisement in a $50 billion deal as recent as this past year. Brookfield Asset Management has informally proposed the idea of launching a fund worth $50 billion, according to sources reported by the Globe and Mail. The fund aims to raise money from major Canadian pension funds and the federal government to invest in Canadian assets. The proposal has received limited interest, with 3 sources stating it is unlikely to gain momentum. In recent weeks, Brookfield held preliminary discussions with some of Canada's largest pension funds with the intention of raising over $35 billion from these funds. The Toronto-based asset manager also sought a $10 billion contribution from the federal government and planned to contribute as much as $4 billion of its own capital, one source says. The pension funds have shown little interest in the proposal, partly due to concerns over the limited availability of large-scale investable assets in Canada that fit their risk profile. Again, it was pitched as like, oh, we're going to reinvest in Canada. It's going to be all good. But Brookfield actively tried to lobby to centralize the investments of the pension funds in Canada. You know what's going on right now, the private equity in the States, where they essentially took pension funds and invested them in bad debt, or sucking the value out of these companies, selling them off, and then moving on to the next thing. That is the next big short. And this time, these companies will have to be bailed out because they're doing it with people's pensions. Brookfield's trying to do the same thing in Canada. Private equity, getting involved, buying up assets, selling them off, sucking all the value out of them, and then selling it off in pieces. That's what private equity does. That's what these bankers do. And the chair of Brookfield, Mark Carney himself, was trying to secure and centralize as much pension fund dollars as possible under one roof. Luckily, it didn't work out. But this is my problem, is if Mark Carney's a prime minister, you know this is going through. You know this is going to happen. And that should scare you. But back to Pierre Poilievre, calling Mark Carney for what he is, a political grifter. And I love that he used that terminology because that's exactly who he is. He doesn't actually care about Canada. He doesn't care about what Canadians are about, doesn't care about our values, doesn't care what we bring to the table. He just sees Canadian citizens as dollar signs to help him get rich. And then shifting gears a little bit, the frustration people are feeling lately is the fact that, well, you know, how can you believe the polls? It's pretty tight out there. You know, I don't believe anything that the polls are saying. I don't believe anything the media is saying, and rightfully so. I understand why you're feeling that way. Especially when you look at Poilievre's crowd sizes, people are starting to take notice of the crowd size that Poilievre's polling and the crowd sizes Carney's polling. They are drastically different. It is something to be said. Again, it's not a tangible statistic, but it is something that you can go off of. And Pierre Poilievre was asked about his crowd sizes by a reporter in this news conference.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre. Laura Stone, Globe and Mail. I want to ask about...
How did you like our rally last night?
Well, I wanted to ask about your rallies.
Thank you.
And whether size matters. I actually want to know about your rallies and what your strategy is and who you're talking to. Because you bring up things like woke mob, Century Initiative, bulldozing the CBC, I'm exaggerating, but getting rid of CBC HQ. At what point are you just talking in an echo chamber to people who already feel that way? Or do you feel like these are broadening the tent of support to Liberal or undecided voters to get them on board with your campaign?
I think it's pretty broad. I think how many people do you think we had last night?
Thousands.
Well, that's pretty obvious. I think you can be more precise than that.
I don't. I mean, the party said 10,000 register. There's reports of 15. I really can't say.
One last question. When was the last time we had a rally that big in Canada?
I don't know. I've never been to a political rally that big, I don't think.
You know a lot about politics.
Well,
You're a very well-informed person. I know that if there were a bigger rally than that, you would know about it. I think so. But I think it was pretty incredible. Were any of you there? Yes. It's magic, eh? Wow. Incredible. Listen, I think to have 10 or 15,000 people at one political rally, this is a movement like we've never seen because people want change. They want to put our country first for a change. They've seen that after the lost Liberal decade of doubling housing costs, of rising crime, of taxes out of control, of our economy weakened under America's thumb, they can't afford to live.
Breaks it down pretty simply of like why the crowds are so large. And it is nice to see a little bit of a lighthearted approach to this from the reporter and from him here. But it is something that people are noticing. It is like these crowds are large. But when you talk about these things, are you speaking in an echo chamber? Are you broadening the tent? Yada, yada, yada. That was the question. Well, Nano's poll came out as recent as yesterday. And they have Liberals at 42.7% and the Conservatives at 38.1%. And again, I know you fall into the camp, and I fall into that too, where it's like these polls, you can only trust so much. There's been a lot of funkiness around them with this election. But if even these polls are showing this type of tightening, it is interesting because if you look at the change, the 3-day change, Liberals are down 3.2 points. The Conservatives are up 3.2 points. It's tightening. And if even these biased polls are tightening, that should tell you what is happening on the ground. There is a groundswell of support around Poilievre and the Conservative Party because the message is resonating. I'll be curious to see what happens because here he talks about the crowd size and it's pretty big. How many people do you think it was? Bum, 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 bum. That was the conversation. But you just know because it's already happening. The left is starting to equate that to Donald Trump and they can't help but equate Poilievre to Donald Trump because they don't have a platform, right? They don't have anything they're actually campaigning on that's anything of consequence. It is all about Trump bad. We're going to fight Trump, yada, yada, yada. So we got to compare Poilievre to Trump, and that's how we're going to win. And that's what they're going to continue to do. And unfortunately, as much as I thought this was a comedic situation, yeah, we'll see if it works. Liberals are going to take that like, oh, look at him. He's like Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes because they're jealous. They're upset that they don't get the same crowd sizes. And they're not going to talk about it because they don't have anything to talk about. It is fascinating to watch. But that will be on repeat on the left. And we'll see how that impacts voting interest as we move forward. Because speaking on the Donald Trump situation, well, Blanchette was asked about Mark Carney. And he was like, oh, how Quebecers feeling about Mark Carney? How do you feel about Mark Carney? How do you feel about him? And well, Blanchette, he didn't mince any words.
Quebec.
I think he does not give a damn. It is a problem for him to be forced to try to speak French, and he doesn't like it, and he does not really understand. And then he will have to come in a debate against two guys who speak French pretty well, still improving. He doesn't like us so much. He will never say that he does not like us, but I don't feel the love. I don't feel interest for Quebec. I don't feel interest for the difference. I don't feel interest for the language. I don't feel interest for the culture. I don't feel interest for anything which is Quebec. He doesn't say the words lumberwood. He doesn't say the word aluminum. He doesn't say the word fisheries. He doesn't say the word aerospace. He doesn't. What defines us is not even part of his vocabulary. He still has 3 weeks to show that even in minority, he wouldn't be so bad. Because for the time being, I don't see what's good for Quebec in it.
He lays out pretty simple how he feels about Carney and how Carney may play in Quebec. He's like, I'm not feeling the love for Quebec from Carney. Not really enjoying what he's been saying or lack thereof. And the reason why I think this is important, because this, again, happened yesterday and I'm just kind of catching up on it now, is it'll be interesting how this plays in Quebec. Because right now, Liberals are playing pretty strong in Quebec as we speak. And it's because of the Trump effect. It's because, the Trump conversation has been pretty loud. And there's one thing about Quebec. They may dislike Canada. And they may dislike being a part of Canada. Or at least some of the population is not fans of being Canada or being a part of Canada or not fans of how Canada's treated Quebec from their perspective. But there is one thing that they do hate more, and that is America and Donald Trump. That's always how it's been. It's been that way. They've never liked America. They will 100% go full on Canadian nationalists if it means that they can fight America. That's always how Quebec's operate. That's just kind of how they do. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. If the Donald Trump talk gets much more quiet, he kind of leaves us alone and lets this election take place. We'll see how that plays in Quebec when they start realizing this Mark Carney guy doesn't actually care about us. He seems to have disdain for our language. He doesn't care about our cultures. He doesn't care about who we are. And we'll see how that plays with Quebec if the Donald Trump conversation gets quiet and they focus on the Canadian situation again. They focus on the Canadian issue, focus on who's running for prime minister and how they make them feel. It'll be fascinating to watch. Keep an eye on it. But last but not least, MP Raitt getting a little, excited about what Liberals are doing and saying that we are operating better than Doug Ford did in the provincial election. There's things you got to do. I don't like how Doug Ford approached it. We're going to try and fight Donald Trump. That's our focus. And that should have been his focus. That's why I think he did okay. And he goes on, talks, and then Lisa Raitt sets him straight. And it is interesting.
Doug Ford made his provincial campaign a single issue about who can take on Donald Trump and do so effectively and advocate for Ontario and for Canada. And instead of attracting that sort of type of leadership and forging that alliance, he spent more time appeasing Daniel Smith out west. It just seems to me a bizarre lack of judgment and shows that he's not demonstrating the type of judgment that Canadians want to see right now, therefore causing Conservatives to come over to the Liberal side as well.
Lisa, I'll let you respond to that. I'll just say that, yeah, that's what the premier ran on here in Ontario, and he had an abysmal turnout at the voting poll. And I think that, you know, narrowing in on what's really driving people to the polls these days is going to be affordability. And I'm just hoping that we do have a really great turnout. I mean, that's what's going to be the key here, having people get out there and vote. And I would just say, I would add one last thing. I always believe that the soft underbelly for the Liberals, or what their weakness is when they get a little bit too far ahead of themselves in terms of arrogance. And I would welcome the arrogance to be shown over and over again as we roll in the next 3 weeks, because that's good for us.
Calls it out for what it is. You know, Liberals, get comfortable with the polls. You know, Liberals, get pumped up, get prideful about what the polls are saying, and we'll see how it all works out for you. We'll see what happens. But anyways, that's the show. Have yourselves a good one. Join myself and Reg. We'll be going live tonight instead of Thursday, because, well, your boy is getting a little bit closer to baby time happening, and that baby could drop at any point. So we decided to bump it up 2 days early and get one last live in before, well, and my life changes forever. So have yourselves a good one. I'm out.